Cavan Elizabeth, a wedding photographer based in San Diego, and today I'm going to be doing a Q&A about all of the different wedding related things that you guys wanted to know. First off, I want to say that I am sorry that I have had less videos this month, and with the bridal store that we just purchased, which you have not heard about, I'll link a video up here. It's just been extra busy. I've had so many engagement sessions and weddings this month and all sorts of things to do. I have a really big wedding this upcoming weekend, which I'm very excited about. We've also been having our condo remodeled, which is going to be done really soon. But basically that means that the only day that I'm able to film is typically Saturday or Sunday. And when I have a wedding on Saturday, the last thing I want to do is like wake up, put on makeup on Sunday and film and work. So it's just been a little bit tougher, but hopefully November will be a little bit better and I'll actually be able to film some things at the dress shop and do a little bit of a series on that so you guys can learn a little bit more about the dress process. I have already learned so much becoming a new owner of the shop, so I'm really excited to share that with you guys. But for today, I'm going to be answering the questions that you sent me here on YouTube. And I'm going to start off with Jenna's question. She says, maybe this is a silly question, but when I'm looking at colors of items like bridesmaids' dresses, they tend to photograph very different than the color I see with my eye. Is it silly to worry if my photographer will capture the color as seen, or will it be different like a phone photo captures? So that's a really great thing. And I love that you noticed that, Jenna, because yes, a lot of digital cameras just seem to tweak the color in that photo as opposed to what's true to life. That's one of the reasons that I love film photography, because I find that my film photos capture the colors, especially different reds, purple tones, things like that, a lot more true to what they look like in person. Whereas a lot of times the digital photos I take, even if I've made it the cleanest edit possible, those colors still look very different from what they looked like in real life. And that to me is very important, because if a bride is choosing a particular color of flower or dress, she's going to want that to look the same in the photos, and that is one of the hang-ups with digital photography, is it does that. Now sometimes it can be easily tweaked, but I would say if you are worried about this and you have a particularly bold color in your wedding, then just let the photographer know that you want to make sure that those colors are true to life in the photos as much as possible. If they do shoot film, it's probably more likely that they'll be more true to life, but film photography can be a little bit more expensive just because film itself is very expensive. So just one thing to keep in mind. If a couple does a first look, how long is their portrait session? So I actually did an entire video about timelines, which I'll link to up here. Typically what I'm doing with my couples is they'll have a first look, and I will oftentimes schedule 45 minutes for first look in portraits. I do make sure to have padding in the time before that when they're getting ready, because the last thing I want is for hair and makeup to run late and then we lose out on first look in portrait time. I will always also schedule sunset portraits later in the day, typically for about 10 to 15 minutes. But if I know that this is a couple who's got a bigger venue, we want to cover more ground, do a lot more with bride and groom portraits, then I might make that first look session an hour, and then make sure we definitely get another 15 minutes during sunset. Or if there's not a sunset, because or if there's not like a sunset time later on in the day, because it is during cocktail hour, then I'll go ahead and pull them during cocktail hour for more. But every photographer is different. Some photographers might only want 15 minutes, some might want 2 hours. So you're gonna have to check with your own photographer. This one person asked me, how do I manage my schedule, respond to emails, call clients for updates, edit, and have personal time? That's a great question, and I have a very simple answer for that, which is that I am organized. I like automation, so I have a lot of software that automates my work for me in this business, and I'm really efficient. So I try to, for example, social media, I will sit down one day a week, schedule up a full week or maybe even 2 weeks in advance worth of posts in one sitting, and then it's taken care of. I have email templates for just about every scenario you could ever think of, and I have an online scheduler so brides can schedule calls with me, so there's no back and forth. So if there's anything that's tedious in my business, I have cut that out and made it really efficient. So that's really the answer to it. Before I bought the bridal boutique, I was feeling like I had too much free time. But now I'm feeling like I don't have enough, at least till we get through construction and the bridal shop settles down a little bit. But honestly, it's just really good time management, prioritizing well, being efficient, and being like extremely organized. That is pretty much it. Any thoughts on having service dogs and pictures or present for the ceremony? Yes, I love that. I would say have your service dog in all of your photos, maybe take it out for a couple. I say that because I love animals in photos, so I would highly recommend having them in your pictures anyway. And my hope would be that like you're so bonded with that animal, it feels like just as loved as a non-service animal would be that somebody would want at a wedding. So I would say definitely include the service animal in your photos. You can have like a handler or somebody nearby that you can pass them off to so you can get a couple of photos without your service animal. But I love it, like the more animals the merrier. And then Christy also asked, do I have any thoughts about photographing more complicated and intricate ceremonies? Would you need a dedicated space to set up? Have you ever shot multi-day weddings? Can you talk about that a little? What goes into it for you? How does the package change? What can you expect from a photographer? So I don't do too many of those. A lot of times I see that with Indian weddings. I simply just don't get any inquiries for Indian weddings. Like I've probably only had 1 or 2 in my entire career. I'd be happy to do them, but I don't get inquiries for them. But I would honestly take my same packages and just add extra hours to them, and they could split it over 2 days. There would be a minimum amount of hours like on each day, especially if they wanted a Saturday and a Sunday. I need to make sure that both of those days are like enough work for me to justify, you know, basically taking up 2 days with one client. So for example, they can't just get me for 1 hour on that Sunday. It's probably gonna have to be at least 3 hours. So something like that to make sure that it's worth like my time. And then for intricate ceremonies, the only thing that I would say about that is if you have a ceremony where you're going to be doing something that's out of the ordinary or something that's very culturally specific, just make sure that your photographer knows what's going to happen because they don't necessarily know what happens in that cultural type of ceremony. So things that could pop up, they might not be like not ready for, but not aware of like the significance or of the timing, or they might just be confused on the ordering. So just let them know. I don't think they need to have shot that particular kind of ceremony before, as long as they're prepared, know what to expect ahead of time. Thank you guys for sending these. I really like when you guys have things to ask me or things to tell me. It makes me feel like I'm not just talking to my camera all the time, that I'm actually talking to you guys, which I really appreciate. So one bride, Hannah, says, can you please talk about what a second shooter does throughout the wedding? She also was saying that she has to design her second shooter's timeline for the wedding, and I told her that is not a bride's job. The main photographer, so me and my business, should be the one designing the second photographer's timeline. So what I typically do for my second shooters is I will have them start with me in the bride's room. Most of my weddings are bride and groom, so I'm just gonna say that for this example. So they would start with me for a little bit, shooting the bride and her friends, her mom, getting ready while I'm shooting all my pretty flat lays. And then I'll send my second shooter to the groom's room because grooms typically get ready very quickly. There's not a whole lot of like stuff happening. So that is pretty much where my second shooter goes while I finish up with the bride, getting into her gown. And then pretty much the second shooter stays with me for the bulk of the day. I will typically, during family portraits, send them to go ahead and photograph the ceremony details before guests arrive, because guests love to throw their purses and their coats and all their stuff all over the chairs, and then that's not as pretty of a photo. So we always try to get those details before people mess it all up with their accessories. So that's what I'll do. And then during the ceremony, we're shooting different angles. During cocktail hour, I'm usually photographing the reception details while my second shooter stays at cocktail hour to get candid photos, smiling at the camera photos, all sorts of things like that. And then during the reception, just shooting different angles. So they're with me most of the day, but then I tell them when I need them to go shoot something separate from me, and that's pretty much how that works. So that should always be the responsibility of the primary shooter to designate what the second shooter is doing. What's your recommendation on calligraphy? I love good calligraphy, but I cannot afford professional writing for all the invitations and escort cards for over 250 guests. I love that, and I actually just covered this in my video on like ways to make your wedding feel like more grand in photos. If you want, you can simply have your calligrapher or hire a calligrapher to do one set for your photos, and it's not to pretend like you had that for all your guests. It's something that you can keep for yourself. Like you wanted that, but it's not feasible for you to do it for every single one of your guests, but at least you have one for your own keepsake. And that is exactly what we did, and I plan at some point when I get my life together to frame it and have it hanging on the walls in my office. So that's what I wanted to do. Even though the guests didn't get the envelope liner and they didn't get the hand calligraphy on the envelopes, I wanted a pair for my photos and for myself to keep. So that is something that you guys can do, which gives you the look you want, but you don't have to pay for it for all of your wedding guests. And then Jillian asks, have you ever seen a wedding where cocktail hour food is laid out on a grazing self-serve table as opposed to past finger foods? Yes, I have. A lot of times I see a combination of both or just tray pass. It's pretty rare that I see just a grazing table, but it does happen. And Martha Stewart recently did post a whole blog all about inspiration for grazing tables. So if I can find that, I'll link it below. So that's something you guys can check out. But they're really neat. You can just have guests self-serve. You don't have to have tray pass. With tray pass, sometimes there might be a higher cost because, I don't know, there's labor involved and people that have to be hired for that. So a grazing table might be more cost effective. At the same time, the grazing table might not keep fresh as long, just depending on what's out there. And once it is kind of dwindling down, it doesn't look as nice, which is not a really big deal, but it's just something to keep in mind if that's something that would bother you. Whereas tray pass, they're always coming out fresh. When the tray gets emptied, they go back, they reload, they come back. So it's a little bit cleaner of a presentation, but honestly, whichever one you want to do, I think would be totally fine. A Simply Curated says, I'm planning a micro wedding, under 50 guests, restaurant reception, small park ceremony in Brooklyn on a Wednesday. What would be some things to consider when looking for a photographer and videographer for a smaller non-traditional wedding? Well, one really great thing is the fact that you're doing this on a Wednesday is phenomenal because a lot of photographers will have lower hourly minimums Monday through Thursday. So for me, for example, on an actual wedding day, my minimum is typically 7 or 8 hours. 8 is preferred, that's my minimum. Unless you're booking me a month in advance, I'm not gonna come shoot a Saturday wedding for 4 hours because I could very likely book a really large wedding. However, if you want to have me for a minimum of 2 hours on a Wednesday, you can have at it. So your costs are gonna be way less. Even if the photographer is charging the same prices for their time, it's way less hours you're having to pay for, and I would be willing to bet the videographer is the same. If I was having a 50 guest wedding that I was shooting, I would probably still have a second shooter. My general rule, my own personal rule, is anything over 25 people, I'm gonna have a second shooter for, just for certain areas of the day when I can't be in 2 places at once. I can easily capture 50 people on my own, but I might not be able to do things that are happening simultaneously, so that's when I would want a second photographer. Usually when it's 20 people, logistics are so much easier and there's not as many details to shoot because it's smaller. But 50, I would say you could probably get away without a second shooter, but I would recommend one anyway. The Frugal Bride asks, how can I ensure the photographer and videographer will work well together? They've never met, but I need them to get along and each capture the best moments. First of all, hopefully they're really professional and they can work together easily regardless. But I always tell my brides, here's my list of preferred videographers. I really love them. They work great. They have a similar aesthetic. They work easily alongside me, because I have had some videographers in the past who would interrupt me in the middle of my posing and make the couple do really bizarre things. And it was just really rude of them to interrupt my process, because I would not have done the same thing to them if it was their turn to be working with the couple. So, I mean, honestly, I would just ask your photographer or your videographer, have you ever heard of each other? Check out your work. If you guys want to connect, here's each other's emails, and that should be great. And as long as they're professional, they're going to be courteous and get along. Hopefully you have not hired a photographer or videographer who's super wild and in the way and really selfish about what they're shooting. So hopefully you'll be all set. Would love to see a video from a guest perspective. I could have totally done that in Massachusetts at my brother-in-law's wedding, but I wanted to just relax and have fun. As in, what do guests remember most and notice from a wedding? I can only account for my own wedding, which was they actually talked about the flowers for several days. I had really fun flowers. They were really lush, asymmetrical, very colorful. So I had several people texting me about the flowers for days after the wedding, which is really cool because flowers were extremely important to me. I also had people talking about our welcome dinner drinks. Those cocktails were really good. So people talked about that. People talked about the food from our wedding a lot. And that's probably the main things. They really loved our venue. They loved how cool it was and how neat it was to be outdoors, because a lot of my guests were East Coast, so they're used to indoor receptions. So that for them was unique. So at least for my wedding, that's what our guests talked about. From the wedding that I just went to for my brother-in-law, the things that I think of the most are probably the food and the alcohol. So that's pretty much it. And the cookies, they gave us as favors, which some of you guys know my opinion on favors. I don't really think that they're a good use of money. However, I love edible favors because those usually will be consumed, whereas little trinkets often get left behind. So, what is your opinion on having an officiant for the ceremony? What would you say would be pros and cons of not having one? My state is a Quaker stake, so officiants are not required to get married. Very interesting. I honestly feel like for an officiant, not only in a lot of states they have to be there legally, but they help with the flow of the wedding and they help keep that structure. So I think if you're not gonna have an officiant, that's completely fine. Like, do whatever you want. You save a little bit of money. You don't have to have one, don't have one. But make sure that you have some sort of structure memorized so that you guys don't just get up there and like it ends up being drawn out and going forever and you're like, what do we do now? Like, so I would have some sort of a plan like that to make sure that you're keeping things on track and on time. So for example, you guys are gonna walk up the aisle. I don't know, maybe you'll both give like a welcome speech. I've never seen a wedding without an officiant, so I don't really know, but here's just my idea. So you give like, thank you for being here maybe, I don't know, or have somebody else like introduce you guys and then they go sit, something like that. You'll have to work that out, I don't know. And then you could just read each other your vows and then that could be it. Like it could just be really short and sweet. Maybe you have a friend do a reading that's important to you. I don't know, like you could really just do whatever you want. My partner and I plan to provide childcare worker and a courtesy bus for our guests so they can have the best of both worlds, but it is expensive. What do you think of asking guests to contribute to the cost for the ones with children or planning to use the bus? Sort of splitting the cost. Is this rude? How would you ask? I feel guilty, but we really want a child-free reception and most of our guests have to travel a distance for our wedding. I think you definitely need to be either providing for your guests transportation if they're supposed to get on this bus, or saying that they can get themselves there. I don't think it's right to hire a bus yourself and then ask the guest to pay for that. However, on the child side, I have seen a lot of weddings that provide childcare where the couple pays for all the childcare, or they simply tell their guest ahead of time, childcare will be provided at like this rate per child per hour. And then that way they know in advance that that's going to be something that can be offered. So if they, as the adults, choose to bring their children to this wedding instead of leaving them home with a relative or babysitter, they at least are prepared for that. So I think it's perfectly fine to ask the guests with children to pay for that childcare. I don't see anything wrong with that. They're bringing their kids, so it's kind of on them, like in the nicest way possible. But I do think that you need to pay for their bus if you are hiring a bus. Now, if you don't want to pay for guest transportation, then you can just encourage people to Uber or just get there on their own. But hiring a bus, you need to hire the bus and pay for it yourself. Do you have any recommendations for wedding planner books? I'm really picky and trying to find one that is functional and aesthetically pleasing to me as well. Flute Co. And they do wedding planner books. I did a video about them a really long time ago, I think. And so that could be one I can link down in the comments. And then my friend Alicia from Bridechilla, I believe she has a wedding planner book as well. I have not read it, but knowing that it's coming from her, I'm sure it's incredible. So I will link that one down below as well. What have been some of your favorite songs you've seen used during processionals, and what did I use for my own? Every song I like seems so overdone. Yes, there are a lot of songs that I hear at multiple weddings a year, and as somebody who attends a lot of weddings, like I can get really tired of those songs. I think ultimately choose what song you like. I have a whole video about songs up here. I think that the most memorable ones for me were songs that were unexpected. They did not seem cliche or overly used. It was a song like, oh, like, okay, that's cool. Make it your own. If you guys have a song that's important to you, even if it's like a rock song or something that doesn't seem very aisle-y, just do it. Do what you want for your music. I think that that's really cool. I know there are some wedding blogs, maybe Green Wedding Shoes. Whenever they post a real wedding, they will typically put the songs that they walk down the aisle to, so you might find that. Green Wedding Shoes does tend to have some more non-traditional weddings, so that might be a good place to find some song inspiration for you. For us, since we didn't have a ceremony, we ended up just having our reception. Our first dance song was Goodbye Horses by Q Lazarus. That was a very unique song, and it was cool for us. So it was just something that was neat. We were like, is this gonna work? Like, this isn't a wedding song, but whatever, we like it. It's cool, it's the only song between us that has any sort of meaning. So that's what we chose. So that is pretty much it for all of the questions right now. Again, I'm gonna be a little bit slower for the rest of this month. This might be the only video I put out this week, so apologies in advance, but hopefully once I get a little bit further into November, then I can actually start posting more. I did wanna ask you guys, I posted a behind the scenes video from a wedding that I shot up in Northern California about a month or two ago, and it just didn't get that many views, so I don't know if you guys actually wanna see videos of behind the scenes. It does take some effort to make sure that I'm reminding my assistant to film things throughout the day. So if that's not something you guys care that much about, then let me know. If it is, then I can try to do it for my wedding this weekend. It's gonna be a really cool, beautiful wedding in Palm Springs. But again, like I don't wanna make my assistant go through the trouble of like taking all these videos if that's not something that you guys actually wanna see. But anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this Q&A video. I hope it was helpful. I know that I haven't been posting. Again, so sorry. It will definitely get better in November. I will see you guys next time. Bye!